Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear excellencies, good evening and welcome to our event and panel discussion on Africa's impact on Europe's future. My name is Michael Zinkanell. I'm the director of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you tonight to this cooperation event of the AIS, the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, together with the Vienna School of International Studies and the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies. The assessment of Africa-EU relations and Africa's impact on Europe's future becomes certainly more critical than ever before, especially against the background of evolving dynamics on the African continent, ranging from rising economic importances to Africa's geopolitical relevance and the complex security developments and the complex security situation on the African continent. All these aspects, all these dimensions certainly have significant implications for the European Union. There is, of course, a close interlinkage and interrelation between Europe, the European continent, and the African continent. And to better understand and better analyze these developments, it is therefore of key importance to have an open discussion, open debate, to raise awareness and to identify areas where we can increase cooperation and mitigate global challenges. And therefore it's my great pleasure to welcome three distinguished experts that tonight will focus on the strategic role of the African continent, the influence of other geopolitical actors on the African continent, security developments and economic challenges, as well as opportunities. And our three speakers for tonight are Wolfgang Pusztai, chairman of the advisory board of the National Council on Libya-US Relations and AIS senior advisor. Wolfgang Pusztai is a renowned expert for Northern Africa in particular, with an in-depth military and academic background. Then we have Gerald Hainzl with more than 20 years experience in his position as research fellow at the Austrian National Defense Academy, at the Austrian Ministry of Defense. Gerald Hainzl is certainly one of the most distinguished experts on Africa at the Austrian National Defense Academy. You have conducted several research trips to various African countries over the past decades and have an in-depth knowledge also on the situation on the ground. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Mario Holzner, Executive Director of the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies, expert on infrastructure investment and international trade. You will cover the more economic aspects that we will certainly also be discussing tonight. And with no further ado, I'd like to hand over the floor to our AIS President, Dr. Werner Fasslabend, for your introductory remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your welcome, and thank you very much for your coming. Yes, now, okay. Thank you very much. I will try to make it pretty short, but before I also want to welcome you really heartily, and especially our board members, General Weber and Dr. Scholig, who just came from France, a country that usually is occupying itself with Africa more than others. And it's a great pleasure to have you here. And maybe just two more people I want to say. It's a great pleasure for me that Sharif Abdallah is here, an old friend. We had some battles together in Sudan and South Sudan some years ago. And also Peter Heider, great pleasure. He also is occupying himself quite a bit. I just tried to prepare two charts, and I will do it maybe from over here. The first one is the demographic development. Europe and Africa show that they have quite a different situation. Unbelievable, but in 1950, in the period when most of the African countries became independent, Africa had round about 200 million inhabitants, compared to more than 500 million in Europe. That means that Europe then used to be 2.5 or 3 times as big from the population as Africa. In the meantime, the situation has changed quite a bit. 1.5 billion in Africa in 2025, and around about 740, 750 billion there in this number. Also, the population of Russia is included. It's not only the western part of Europe. And the forecast is, okay, for Europe, 704 million for 2050, but almost 2.5 billion for Africa in 2050. And at the end of the century, we can see that Europe will go back to a little bit more than 500 million people, probably. And Africa at the other side will increase once more for about 1.5 billion people. And this, of course, will change the relations completely. I mean, if you think, that Europe at the end of this century probably will have round about the same number of inhabitants that it had in 1950, and Africa round about 20 times more than it had. And this relation certainly will influence the development not only within the continent within the continents, but between the continents in a way more than any other factor probably for the future. So I stop here. I go to my next picture, and this is the geographic distances. Most Europeans are not aware how close Europe is. If you take Vienna at the center and you are drawing just a circle around it to the end of Northern Europe and Eastern Europe, the Ural Mountains, or in the west also with Iceland, then you come with this circle not only to northern Africa, to North African countries, the whole Sahel zone, but you go down to more or less Central Africa, Central African Republic, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and so on. And this means, that in our mind, Africa is by far more away. This circle shows, that the distances to Nigeria are closer than to Dubai or to Central Asian countries. But we are not aware, and we also don't have the infrastructure. We have to be aware that this will be one of the main things to have in the future. I said 2 charts. I just take the third one that I have shown already a few times once again. We have to be aware from our European side that we have 3 neighboring regions in addition to the seaside in the north and in the west. This is Eastern Europe, especially with Russia. It is the Middle East, and it is West and North Africa. And we have to be aware that all those 3 regions show quite some instability. and will show probably quite some instability also in the future. And if we want to develop our neighborhood, we certainly can say that there is no way without Africa. And insofar, I think it will be necessary to change a little bit our minds, and this is also the reason why we organized this meeting, just to provide more information. Where is Africa? A continent with 54, 55, 56 states, of course, very difficult to analyze. It's a continent that has states that are quite different to our ethnically national states, because there is no single state where you just have one nation within the territory. And insofar, it will be necessary really to not only develop our minds, but also to engage ourselves in knowing a little bit more and in shaping the future between Europe and Africa. Because this will not be only the question of the past colonial period. It will not be just a question of today migration. It will be much, much more. We have to be aware that, almost 4 billion people at the end of the century will mean not only, of course, migration problems and challenges still ongoing, but also, at the other hand, an enormous human capital that is living over there. And this in a period when the population of China will go down already to half of what it has been now or in the past years. Okay, with this, I want to stop. We will go on and certainly look at the security situation at the beginning with Wolfgang Pusztai. He is one, not only high-ranking soldier, he is a colonel, and he studied not only in Austria, but also at the general staff courses in America, and he certainly is an expert about the security situation in this region, and therefore, Wolfgang, please, if you could present us your analysis.
Perfect. Dear Werner, dear President, ladies and gentlemen, on June 27, 2025, the Washington Accord, a peace agreement between Rwanda, Congo, was signed under the auspices of US President Donald Trump. According to Trump, this deal ended a decades-long war. But what is behind this deal? And most important, does it work? Let's have at first a look on the main types of conflicts in Africa. This picture is by no means a complete description of all the wars and conflicts in Africa, but it highlights the main types of conflict that we have in Africa. We have Islamist insurgencies, in particular in the Sahel area, in the sub-Saharan area, and in Eastern Africa, driven mainly by a Salafi ideology. We have territorial disputes, not only in the Western Sahara, but also several in Central Africa, including between Sudan and South Sudan, but also in the Mediterranean. If you have a look up on the right upper corner of my slide, you can see the description of the economic exclusive zones between Libya and Turkey in accordance with the 2019 Memorandum of Understanding between the at that time Libyan government in Tripoli and the Republic of Turkey. This nice little sketch means that according to the interpretation of Libya and Turkey, islands do not have a continental shelf, and as such, islands do not have an economic exclusive zone. If this would be accepted, it would be clearly against the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, and not only Greece have already objected against this, but just a couple of days ago, also Egypt. But I'm pretty sure, as this is for Turkey of vital interest regarding the argumentation in the Eastern Mediterranean, not only with regard to Libya, but in particular with regard to Greece in the Aegean and Cyprus, we will hear much more about this. A territorial dispute, which is in particular of relevance because an African state, Libya, has a, let's say, particular point of view about the international law of the sea. We have political power struggles. The most bloody one currently is in Sudan, where the breakaway rapid support forces break away from the central government, from the central military forces, have led to probably what is currently the most bloody civil war in Africa. We have conflicts about resources, especially in Eastern Congo. That's the conflict that the American president intends to end, and I would say hopefully he will succeed. We have a number of separatist movements, not only in Eastern Africa, where Somaliland has declared its independence from Somalia, and the independence movement of the Tuareg in the Central Sahara, especially in northern Mali. But we have also quite bloody, but in Europe rather unknown conflicts, like the conflict about Ambazonia. If you have a look on the area of Cameroon, you can see the flash in there. Cameroon was divided between French and British colonial, today's Cameroon, was divided between French and British colonial rule. After independence, and that's of importance, after a referendum, the English-speaking regions were integrated not into Nigeria, but into the predominantly francophone state of Cameroon. And in 2017, a separatist movement declared the independence of Ambazonia. Well, within the last couple of years, about 10,000 people were killed, 800,000 people are internally displaced, and about 80,000 people left for Nigeria. We have ethnic violence. Most prominent and best known is probably what's going on in Darfur, again going on in Darfur. And the rapid support forces that I've mentioned before are involved also in this. But we have also other ethnic violences, for example, in Congo. And let me also stress, we have quite a huge amount of street riots of poverty-driven violence. Maybe you have seen it in the news that just a couple of days ago, there were street riots in Madagascar because of high prices, because of inflation, because of corruption, and for many other grievances, because of the low social standards in these countries. And this is an issue not only in Madagascar, it's also an issue in Kenya, it's an issue in Angola, and in many other countries. So we have quite a lot of different kinds of conflicts. The question is, as our topic is today, how this affects Europe. How does this affect European interests? Maybe you have realized on the slide before that other countries are reacting to this crisis by sending troops. Dr. Hainzl will later on mention also what Russia and Turkey and China are doing in Africa. Other countries are reacting by military means, especially the Russians. Other countries are reacting by military and economic means, for example, Turkey. Other countries are reacting predominantly with economic means, mainly China. But I'm pretty sure that he will elaborate about this a little bit more in future. And what does Europe do? Does Europe need to do anything about this? How does all this affect European interests? Please have a look first at the pyramid on the left side of the slide. The pyramid of strategic interests. The pyramid of strategic interests is valid not only for the Europeans and for the Americans, but also for each and every African countries. And it's all about interests. If you don't have achieved a certain amount of physical security, you don't have the proper foundation for gaining economic prosperity. If you don't have enough to eat, if you don't have physical security, usually you don't care so much about gender rights and democracy. So a certain amount of physical security, an amount of economic prosperity is usually a precondition for promoting and preserving values. And all three of these categories, from a European point of view, are affected by what's going on in Africa with regard to the crisis and to the wars. Our security interests are affected due to the economic, due to the humanitarian and socio-economic dimension, which triggers huge migrant waves. And migration over the Mediterranean towards Europe, not only through the central Mediterranean route, but also via the Canary Islands towards Portugal and Spain. And by no means it can be expected that this will slow down in the next years to come. This is also affected by terrorism, especially by terrorism originating from the Sahel states, from the states where these Islamic insurgencies are still very much active. This includes Al-Qaeda affiliates, especially Al-Qaeda affiliates, and this includes also affiliates of the Islamic State. Fortunately, right now we have somehow a calm period in Europe that there are no major terrorist attacks, but this is certainly not gone. And if these conflicts continue, I'm pretty sure that we will unfortunately have some incidents again in Europe. The situation and the involvement of countries like Russia, Turkey and China affects also European economic interests. There is a loss of influence to Russia, especially with regard to the Sahel region. Think about the uranium mines in Niger that were in the hands of French companies, and now the situation in the future looks a little bit different, but I guess this will be also mentioned later on. Our influence is getting lost towards China, not only since yesterday, this is going on since, I would say, decades. And it's going partially on over to Turkey. Quite interestingly, from Istanbul, there is a flight connection to each and every African capital. So it's quite easy for anyone in Africa to travel to Turkey. You have a direct flight. The consequence is that this loss of influence goes hand in hand with the loss of economic relations. A handover of these economic relations, a transition towards China, towards Russia, and partially also towards Turkey. And European companies are being pushed out. Ask about the French companies and their situation in the Sahel region. Ask about the Belgians and the Congo. Ask about many other European countries. So these conflicts have a huge negative impact on European economic interests. And of course, it's just on the top of the pyramid, the value-related interests. It matters for Europe that there is a humanitarian crisis in many African countries. It matters for Europe that there are poor human rights standards. It matters for Europe that democracy and market democracy is driven back in many countries. What are the triggers and drivers for conflict? Frequently, these triggers and drivers are quite complex. Usually it is connected with a lack of economic development, which in turn leads to a difficult socio-economic situation of the population. Many conflicts, especially the ones in Congo and in the Sahel region, are connected with a struggle for natural resources and for fertile land, especially in East Africa. The struggle for fertile land, the struggle for water, for fresh water, is an issue that becomes ever more prominent. Think about the Ethiopian Great Renaissance Dam and the troubles that Egypt and Sudan probably will have about this. So the lack of fresh water is a big issue, especially if we keep in mind that global warming, probably President Trump will not agree with me, that global warming is still ongoing, that this is still a big issue, and it's an ever-increasing issue. Furthermore, there is a religious motivation, especially with the jihadists that I've mentioned in the sub-Saharan region and in some areas in Eastern Africa. And as a first consequence of this, driven by ethnic frequently driven also by ethnic rivalries, we have a huge number of DPREs, of displaced people and refugees, which in turn might also drag other countries into deeper troubles. But let me stress, all this doesn't come on its own. There is a layer below this. There is a layer below this that needs to be analyzed. There are what I call multipliers of destabilization. Multipliers of destabilization. And they include the demographic developments. Dr. Fasslabend has mentioned, today 1.5 billion people. In 25 years, 2.5 billion people. You know about all the challenges about nutrition in Africa. You have heard what I've said about fresh water. Imagine they would have 1 billion more people to deal with. Environmental degradation. I've mentioned fertile land. In Egypt, the corn chamber of the Roman Empire and the corn chamber of the wider region needs to import corn and grain. The problem is that in Egypt, the amount of fertile area is decreasing, is shrinking day by day because of environmental degradation, because of city planning, because of many, many other reasons. This is not only the case, desertification is also a problem in the Sahel region. So, and I'm not a proponent of the Green Party, not a proponent of any party. Environmental degradation is a fact, is a problem, is a challenge we need to be aware of. The next one is corruption. I remember during the Trump 1 presidency, the that time deputy administrator from USAID said to me, Wolfgang, we are going to delete these and that countries from our list of nations where we are donating because we are just creating more millionaires there. We are donating money and we are creating just more millionaires there because it is impossible to deal with corruption there. Corruption is a big issue in many African countries, not only African countries. And the next one is bad governance, an inefficient and a lack of state structures and the number of weak institutions that are not able, for whatever reason, to deal with the situation they have in this country. So, and what can Europe do about this? At first, to be realistic of the impact and of the consequences of your actions. If you are organizing gender seminars in Mali, if you are organizing seminars about human rights in the Central African Republic, the outcome will be accordingly. I don't think this is ridiculous, but it doesn't hit the requirements of the countries in question. Remember the pyramid of interests. The first and foremost interest in these countries is security. Gender rights are coming pretty up on the top of the pyramid. How successful were or are the various EU civilian and military training missions in Mali, in the Central African Republic, in Somalia and in Mozambique? Did they really address the urgent requirements of the countries? I have some questions. Yes, there is a poor human rights records in many countries. But is it really right to undermine the credibility of the leaders in this country by urging them and discussing about human rights every time when a prominent Western European is at a visit there? In 2017, I've lectured at the Bundesakademie für Sicherheitspolitik, the Security and Policy course, the strategische Führungslehrgang of Germany, about Egypt. And Angela Merkel was about to travel to Egypt. And we were discussing, what shall she say about human rights? I said to them, be aware, Al-Sisi is the pharaoh in these countries. He lives also from his reputation. If you are undermining his reputation every day, this won't do any good for him. And if his government needs to resign or is overthrown, this also won't be good for us. So, coming back to the Washington Accords. These were US-led mediations involving, and that's important, Qatar, Arabs, Togo, local from the region, and the African Union Commission. It wanted to end decades of conflict in Eastern conflict, fueled by armed groups like the M23 related to the Tutsis in Rwanda and the FDLR related to the Hutu in Rwanda. The provisions of the agreement were that the DRC ends support for the FDLR, and on the other side, Rwanda ends its support for the M23. All troops from Rwanda should have been withdrawn from Eastern Congo by today. It's not really the case. There should be a meeting, there should be a permanent commission, a joint security coordination commission. It is established, but they have still a long way to go. The key component of this agreement is regional economic integration, to open pathways for Western investments in the region, in Congo's rich deposits of various minerals and also of rare ores. The idea is to give the people a better future, to show them if they are cooperating together and with the West, with the Arabs and with the Americans, that the future will be a better one. Will it work? As of today, no. Will it work next year? We will see. Final one. There is a requirement for a strategy for the stabilization of Africa. And this strategy needs to address the key issues, the underlying multipliers of destabilization. In a phase one, they need to contain the multipliers of destabilization and improve good governance. They need to deal with limit population growth, achieve progress on environmental protection, and minimize corruption and cultivate good governance. How to deal with demographic developments? Ask the Tunisians. They were quite successful during the Ben Ali regime. Social security, education for females, establishing health standards to reduce the mortality of infants, and especially change the role of women in the society will help to lower the fertility rate of these countries. So yes, there are ways you can deal with it. Environmental degradation. It's not necessary to establish a gas power plant somewhere in the Sahara. It's not necessary to ruin the environment by industrialization of the agriculture. It makes more sense to have some kind of subsistence agriculture that helps the people on the ground and then gives them jobs so they can live from their products at home. And if they need something from abroad, this shouldn't be the big challenge. Phase two, and the crucial phase, is stabilization through broad impact projects. This is about implementing the most urgent measures for stabilization and to deal with the key challenges in the social, economic, security, and human rights sectors. This means not high-end hospitals. This means primary healthcare for everyone. This doesn't mean high-end universities. This means primary education for everyone. This doesn't mean, and I come back what Dr. Fasslabend said, not high-end infrastructure, highways. This means primary infrastructure, roads, trains, electricity throughout the country, to establish a network where an economy could grow later on. And I would like to stress it again. This does not mean an industrialization of the agriculture. This does not mean to destroy the environment. Because if this is the case, if these multipliers of destabilizations are not get under control in the next 5 to 10 years, the future will be very dark. Altogether, think about this slide and about what Europe should do. It's all about interests and it's about the right sequence of your actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for not only for your presentation, but also for the clear-cut analysis and also for the clear-cut verbing that you gave us. Because I think in a continent with such a complexity of challenges, but also opportunities, probably what you need more than additional complexities is clear answers how to start something and how to proceed something. Okay, we go now into the next phase, and our next speaker will be Gerald Hainzl. He is the unofficial Africa Hofrat in Austria. His official title is Hofrat. He gained his experience in Africa from the northeast to the southwest. So far, he has really very rich experience all over the continent, and he's full of knowledge and ideas. Please give us your presentation.
Thank you very much. President, colleagues, distinguished audience, I'm honored to give a presentation today on Africa's impact on Europe's future. And of course, we talked a little bit before we started the whole process. So my presentation will be a bit of a follow-up of what Wolfgang said, but I want to just to show you that what the position is from where I will start. So we Europeans have tended to read the rest of world history as a function of European history. It's from Marshall Hodgson. He said it more than 50 years ago, and it's still true today. Today, I read in a newspaper that Zimbabwean authorities took farmland back from white farmers in the early 2000s to redress colonial imbalances. 2 decades later, in lithium-rich areas, land is parceled off again, this time to Chinese miners. So obviously there is a more of a global competition on who has influence in Africa, where is the influence in Africa, and what is to be gained. We already saw the difference between Africa and the European Union, and I remember when the president led this Sudan group, that we struggled to find data how many people are living in Sudan, and we had data between 28 million to 42 million. So we also have to be careful when we get all these numbers, because there are countries where we simply don't know how many people are living there. I know from a colleague that in one country in Africa, the parents are hiding their sons when people are counted because they don't want them to join the military. So it's always tricky, and it's especially tricky for Europeans and Austrians to look at the continent. This is the Democratic Republic of Congo put over Europe, just for you to see the shape of the country and the sheer size of the country. If you compare it to Europe, and it's also important to see that when we are talking about Africa, we should talk about institutions, the African Union, for example, or the regional organizations, or we are talking about single countries, because we can ask ourselves, what is the difference, or what does Nigeria have in common with Botswana, for example? Yeah, it's simply, we are not very careful with our language. Maybe you will find Austria here. I put Austria here to the province of Cabo Delgado in Mozambique, which is approximately the same size. So when it comes to strategic and external interests in Africa, what I found in documents, it was migration, resources, war against international terrorism, piracy, democratization, human rights, and of course, it was already mentioned in the first presentation, markets. Because the continent is growing, there are more people consuming, and it's important for us to know how this demography will develop. And as you can see here, in a bit after 2072, there will be less than 2.1 children per woman. But what does this statistics mean? Basically nothing, because there is a big difference between the various countries, and there is a big difference between the countryside and the cities. So we have to really, if we want to look at it in a professional way, we really have to look at which country, where in this country, and what's really going on there. But this demography is in so far quite important, because as you can see, until around 2050, there are more will be more people in the area, and Wolfgang already mentioned the Sahel area. We have climate change there, so there is less agricultural arable land. for more people. So this will put a demographic pressure on various countries and various areas within the countries. And it will be tricky, not so much for the so-called mega cities, because if you have a mega city like Lagos in Nigeria, if there are 8 million or 9 million or 10 million people, it doesn't put so much pressure on the cities. But if you have a village in the Sahel or a city in the Sahel with maybe 15, 20,000 people, there will be a lot of pressure, not only in bringing goods and services to the people, but also in waste management in these countries. This will be a big challenge. This will lead to migration from the areas where there is not enough food production to these cities, and it will also lead to migration from these areas, and Wolfgang already talked about it, towards Europe and towards other parts of the world. You can always see that I cite the slides where I have them from, because it's important to look at who produced it, because there are various interests in providing such slides. And it was an interesting fact when I did the preparation for this presentation that I found many slides on Russia in Africa, China in Africa, and maybe some European countries in Africa, but you don't find many slides on what is, for example, India doing in Africa, or what are the countries of the Arab world organizing in Africa, how do they engage in Africa. Another problem in this area are the herder-farmer conflicts in the whole Sahel region, where identity is used, be it religious identity or be it ethnic identity, to proceed with this conflicts in order to make sure. And the more the demographic pressure is impacting these communities, the more conflicts we will see in this area. So what are the external interests? Of course, there are critical minerals. And if we were talking about the Democratic Republic of Congo and the so-called energy change in Europe, and all these critical minerals we need for it, like coltan or lithium, the Democratic Republic of the Congo is, from this point of view, the most strategic place in the world, at least for now. So why might Africa become a prominent player in global politics? It's the strategic resources. It's a key for global security and stability. And it's a demographic powerhouse. And of course, there is a hope for progress. And the continent might, in the future and in the not so distant future, gain some momentum in the international scene. What is interesting, if you look at these summits and high-level forums with Africa since 2000, you see at the bottom who started early, like France, China. France already started in 1990, Japan, the European Union, but then in 2007, 2008, Turkey started and became a very important player on the continent, especially in North Africa and in the Horn of Africa. For instance, I think Turkey is the most important partner for Somalia, at least for the moment. You see that other countries are also coming to the scene, like Saudi Arabia or North Korea. But who is really the most influential in Africa? This is as you can see, China on the business front and the trade with Africa in 2021. So China was leading on the business front. Washington was the #1 in development aid, and that's most probably one of the reasons why President Trump now is trying to scale it back a little bit, while others like China or Russia are not so prominent here. But when it comes to arms exports to the continent between 2010 and 2021, you can see that Russia is leading. This has to do with, on one hand, with the sale of military products, but also with the repairment and the maintenance of weapons which were already provided during Soviet times. Although other countries are said that they will be able to do so as well. Here you see how many countries and on which level were at the Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg. It was, the dark ones are the head of states, the lighter ones the head of governments, and the lighter ones are represented, you see them especially in like Chad or Sudan were represented on a lower level. So Russia started with the Russian summit in Sochi, and then with this follow up, and it's important to see that it's a obviously longer strategy to involve African countries, although Russia is stronger in some countries than the other, depending on what the interests are. I would, as a thesis, I would say that Russia is going mainly to country where it can contribute to regime stability without any other interest, and for this regime stability they get resources from this country. So basically what the Wagner Group did, or now it's Afrika Korps, Afriski Korpus, it's basically financed by the countries in order to provide stability for the regime. If you look at this map, this is the trade of the United States versus China. You see 2003 and you see 23. Yeah, it's only Swaziland and Lesotho where the United States are, have more trade deals than China. The Chinese port expansion in Africa, you see in which countries China is trying to get capacity in ports, but it get into troubles with other players in that area, and you see it also here that the foreign investment is growing, and it's also split into North Africa, West Africa, Central, East, and Southern Africa. But in total, between 2023 and 2024, FDIs rose by 75%. I'm sure the next speaker will talk on this a bit as well. This is the foreign direct investment to Africa of the United States and China, and you can see the difference here as well. And we were now talking about Russia and China and US, but nobody or not many people are talking about the other strategic competitors on the continent. This, for example, Turkey's influence in Africa, and you can see on the upper left chart that it was until 2007 it was not very high, and then it really jumped. You can also see to which countries, and they're almost all, as Wolfgang already said, where you can go by plane nowadays. But it's not just Turkey, it's also the Gulf actors here on the Horn of Africa, where you can see how they try to invest and to get into deals with this country. So it's not just the Europeans, and from an African perspective, I would say we could call it a kind of partner shopping is possible, and we Europeans have to rethink our still colonial and Cold War mentality when we deal with African countries, because they simply have other partners as well. I will put one last slide, because it's almost never mentioned. The pink triangles you can see here are Gulf upstream oil and gas projects in sub-Saharan Africa, and the pink ones is Qatar, just to mention also other countries. I think I will now leave it here, and I will be open for questions after the panel president will finish the first round.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. You have to know, you know, I think you cannot ask all the questions what Dr. Hainzl has prepared already the answers by pictures so far. It surely will be interesting to ask the one or other question in the following discussion. But now we go especially to the economic side. And I ask you, Mario Holzner, Director of WIIW, in order to give us your presentation.
Thanks a lot. Let's see.
Does it work?
Yep, here it should be. And if hopefully, yeah, here we are. So yeah, thanks a lot. I will try to cover a little bit more this economic dimension, particularly trade, focus on that, see how is the relationship between Africa and Europe. Maybe just a few words as introduction. I mean, clearly for Europe, the whole issue of supply chains, the issues of dependency, risks, particularly in the green and digital area and the respective resources is an issue. I think what is interesting to see from what happens within Africa is the development of the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, where basically in one way or another all African countries are involved, except Eritrea, if I'm correct. And the majority has already ratified that agreement, but it is not going as swiftly as originally planned. But the basic idea would be to basically get rid of tariffs on 90% of goods trade within Africa. So that obviously has a huge potential for not only fostering economic development within Africa, but also between the Union and Africa, or respectively AFCFTA countries. Just to add a few facts on all the numbers that were given already. While currently, and we have seen what the projections are, but currently the share of Africa's population in the world is about 17%, but only 2% of global manufacturing, for instance, or just 4% of global trade are stemming from Africa. So clearly there is an issue of economic development over the long periods of time. And as mentioned already, there is a huge population increase. In terms of working age population by 2050, the projections see kind of a doubling of that part of the population that can actively be involved in economic activity. And that obviously is already driving economic transformation of the whole continent. We have seen very high growth rates also in one of the previous charts, also particularly in Eastern African countries. Still, Africa mainly exports commodities and imports rather higher value-added products. This will likely also change in the process of economic development. And still, intra-African trade is underdeveloped due to a number of issues, not only the institutional regulatory issues, but obviously also infrastructure plays an important role. But let's see how the Union is interacting with, in this case, the AFCFTA countries, and how also others like China and the US are doing. These are the trade flows, recent data. The yellow one is from the AFCFTA countries, and we see that the European Union is the main market for them. However, as you can see, the trade flows are very small in comparison to those of other big regions, at least in economic terms, of this globe, and on the other hand, if you see top right part, ACFTA countries as recipients of trade of exports to those countries, we see approximately China and the EU as equally important sources of imports to those countries. If we look at the trade flows between the Union and Africa at large, we see actually a fairly balanced trade flow over the longer term. I mean, there are obviously years where you have the one region having more exports to the other regions, but also the other way around. So overall, it's interestingly a rather balanced trade flow. However, it's really just a handful of countries with significant, for instance here, EU exports. So basically it's something like 5 to 6 countries that have that see EU exports to those countries that are somewhere above 10 billion euros per year. And the others are really much, much lower. And these are mostly in North Africa. If you group by regions, we see that North Africa makes more than half of all EU exports to Africa, and then we have basically 2 more countries with which are significant in those EU export activities, and that is South Africa with about 16% of total EU exports to Africa, and Nigeria with 7.5%. So that's basically the brunt of all the export activity of the Union to Africa. What exactly is being traded? If you look on the left-hand side, EU exports to Africa, it's particularly machinery and also other manufactured goods. That's like the largest chunk of it. And on the other side, it's basically mineral fuels resources that are being imported from Africa by the European Union. So it's still a very unequal exchange of goods in this trade relationship. If you focus on the maybe overall still small but nevertheless very important issue of critical raw materials, then clearly there is no trade balance. There is a trade deficit between the Union and Africa. We see much higher imports from Africa than exports to Africa, and that trade balance by and large, even if maybe the last year was a slight increase, by and large this deficit actually increases. It reflects also the growing importance of critical raw materials in the whole production process, particularly in higher value added products. I have tried to actually do something economists call a gravity model, which works in a way that you take bilateral trade flows, such as, for instance, the exports of the Union to Africa. In fact, I modeled it for the whole world, and I looked at how important is a distance between Europe and the respective country on the one hand, and the GDP of the respective country, so to speak, the mass of that country on the other hand. And that typically explains 80% of all EU exports. Yeah? So there are other reasons, there are language issues, who knows what, all kinds of barriers might be important, but by and large, this explains almost all of the exports. And if we then compare what the model predicts, what should be the exports of the Union to which country based on those 2 determinants, distance and mass, so to speak,
then we can see whether there is more actual trade than, in a way, that one would expect by this simple model, or less. And here, basically, we have a chart for Africa in terms of colors. The darker colors reflect countries where this prediction is above 1. So that means trade with those countries is already above the expected potential of just determinants, distance and mass. And that is South Africa, for instance, prominently, Morocco, Libya, Tunisia, Liberia, to give the most important ones. Hence, the light-colored ones are those that are below 1. So basically we see a gap of that potential, and that is particularly in Eastern Africa, in Central Africa, but also important countries where already there is high trade, but where trade could be even stronger. Egypt, Algeria, and Nigeria, to name those some of the biggest countries of the African continent, where actually EU exports could increase if you just think about how close they are and how big those economies are already now. And this is now not to speak about how growth will be over the next decades. We saw the population figures. They will very much translate into GDP growth figures, most likely, and hence one could actually use these coefficients and project how that would work out in the future, and then I think one could forecast future growth trends. But I think overall Africa as a whole, compared to all other countries and regions of the world, European exports have a potential to increase by 1/3. So there is a lot for Europe as a producer of goods and services, but obviously with growth in Africa, there will be also a lot of things that Europe will be able to import in turn from Africa. So my conclusions are basically that at the moment still Africa is a key source of critical raw materials, which are highly important for our green and digital transformation. But that also Africa is developing as an own huge producer as well as market for consumption, and that the ongoing processes in the framework of the AFCFTA is, I think, highly important, could streamline supply chains also, and enhance also EU-Africa relations. And I think increasing and improving trade ties would really support mutual economic growth and resilience. We saw the map by Werner Fasslabend, how close Africa actually really is, and it is really absent in our everyday discussions. It's absent in large parts from the media coverage. It's in a way really a shame how we do not interact with our neighbors, and I think it would offer more interaction, would offer in a way for both Africa and the EU more stable, diversified sourcing of particularly goods, but potentially in the future also more services, and in a way a reduced reliance both of Europe and Africa on China in the making of the new Cold War 2.0 between the US and China and its allies, where in a way those areas in between have somehow to find out how they will actually survive all of this and not become further battlegrounds in the games of bigger powers. So at this point I would like to thank you very much for your attention. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation, and also just similar to the two other presenters, you gave us priorities, and I really want to thank you, because in a continent with such a complex structure, it is necessary to have clear priorities, clear goals, clear priorities, and also realistic ways to do so. I would like now to go into the discussion. I only will ask one question myself due to my former function as defense minister. I ask Wolfgang Pusztai about one thing that was discussed in public very much, the question of the influence of Wagner troops in Asia and the following African Corps afterwards. What has really happened? How is the situation over there?
Actually, regardless the doubtful success of Wagner in Mali, the influence of the Russian mercenary groups in Africa, especially in the Sahel region, there are also some, or were some in Mozambique, is huge. Actually, the governments of Mali, the governments of Burkina Faso, the government of Niger, they rely with regard to military support on the Russians. And for Russia, it is key to use Libya as a logistic hub. This is not so much about the sheer numbers of mercenaries. This is also about drones and about equipment they are bringing in. Actually, the counter-terrorism and the counter-Tuareg campaign in Mali is widely run by the Russians. They have replaced the American and the French soldiers in Niger. They are the ones who are protecting the junta in Burkina Faso. They are the ones conducting the raids, the more difficult raids against terrorism groups in the northern part of Burkina Faso. And they are the ones who are getting quite a huge amount of casualties. Just this year, I think it was in early summer, a larger group of Russian mercenaries was ambushed in northern Mali. And the figures about Russians that were killed ranks between 20 and 80. So they are not as successful as some people might believe, but for the time being, the countries, especially the military regimes in these areas, rely on them. And they are not there only for making some money from the mercenaries. The strategic aim of Russia through these mercenaries is to reduce the influence of the Europeans in the region and of the United States. Think about the American drone bases in Niger that the Americans needed to abandon. So the purpose is to reduce the Western influence in the areas the Russians are active, and the aim is to get access on their own to the resources in this area, from gold to uranium and others. And this is what I've mentioned when I've said that they are pushing out European companies from the region. So this is something Europe needs to deal with. This is something Europe needs to find an answer for.
Okay, thank you very much. And now it's up to you to ask questions. I think there's a lot. Yeah, I have already the last row, please.
Shall we introduce ourselves or not? How do you want to have this?
Just introduce yourself with
Valentin
3
Zeiger,
words.
I'm a professor here, and I'm happy. Thanks for the talk. Question to Wolfgang Pusztai. There is a huge trade route and human trafficking route that runs from Nigeria, Mali, up to Libya. Is it also possible that the Russians want to control these trafficking routes so they can basically switch on and off migration or displacement into the back door of Europe? Thank you.
Okay, maybe we take another one. Krauchenberg in the first row, please.
We have heard about this bitter situation that Russia, without helping in aid, in classical aid, they managed to conquer several countries by paying the high rankings and military. Now, as a matter of fact, by far the biggest aid is coming from Europe. Since many years and to very little effect. Now, we are also split up among all the member countries of the EU, each country having their own aid project. Wouldn't it be much better to combine it within the European Union, because not all our smaller countries are well known in Africa. So I just wonder if we shouldn't concentrate that. Strangely enough, Russia is not colonial, but of course France and Great Britain, they still have this disadvantage. But the European Union as such doesn't have the disadvantage of being mentioned as colonial. So I just wonder if that could be done.
Thank you. A third one. Yeah, over here.
Hello, I'm Andrew Margori. This is a question for anyone who would like to answer upon. Is that for African development, there's the issue of corruption happening. And as mentioned before, is that there has to be infrastructure, education, much more stuff. What is your opinion on the idea of financial literacy as one of the key factors in reducing corruption? Because it's more of, in my opinion, more of an economic issue that causes this corruption. Just as a thought, food for thought.
Okay, another one, and then we will answer it. Yes, please.
Good evening. You kindly spoke about strategic economic interest and soft diplomacy. My name is Ifatu, by the way. I'm a student of the DA. You kindly spoke about strategic economic interest and soft diplomacy as some of the reasons Europe ought to give more attention to its relations with Africa. But I wonder, that's a follow-up to what he asked, if there are any new models of educational exchange that could foster more balanced intellectual flows between Europe and Africa.
Okay, thank you. I think you were the first one.
Yep.
Migration. So
yeah. No, Russia is not able to switch it on and off. Actually, what is frequently misunderstood in Europe is, and you have indicated it, for us it's crime, for us it's human trafficking, for us it's smuggling. For many of them, it is trade. They were conducting Sahara trade since centuries. That time it was ivory and slaves and gold and this and that, and today it's fuel, weapons and migrants. The tribes in the Sahara area, they need this kind of traffic to survive. If you look into northern Niger and if you look into southern Libya, there are no jobs at all. If you want to survive, and if someone offers you to work in this and that smuggling, human trafficking, or whatever gang, many people say yes. And it is not up to the Russians to switch it on and off. It would be up to the, let me say, to the Europeans and to the Arabs to promote the development in these more remote areas so that the people have another chance to live from other than what we call crime and smuggling. So one reaction needs to be to work, and you remember what I've said with my model, my strategy for stabilization, to work exactly on these priorities in these regions and focus on it, but Russia can't switch it on and off. Also not on the northern coast in Libya, where most of them are departing. That's not the influence. This is done by the local gangs and tribes.
Thank you. If I go further, Mario?
Mm-hmm. Well, there were a number of interesting issues. I mean, clearly European aid is fragmented massively. And actually, this is just part of the story. I think the problem is also deeper in terms of what our strategic potential support in terms of infrastructure investment, for instance, looks like. And there was an initiative by the Commission, Global Gateway, that had particular focus on Africa, but I mean, if you look at what happened so far, it's almost nothing. There's a handful of some projects. The billions and whatever was promised, nothing of that really materialized. And I think one major issue is that behind a lot of, as a vehicle for investment financing in infrastructure, the EIB is a core element. And the EIB basically is an investment bank where not a single project fails ever. These projects are like planned years in advance, and everything is super fine and everything works out. But which project really in more difficult countries like in the Balkans or also in Africa, where indeed issues of corruption and so on are an issue, often there are not these projects that have zero risk. And so I think we need new institutions that actually accept that there is a failure rate, that there is risky investment. And I think that is what, for instance, China is doing. China is doing, so to speak, political projects. The EIB is, by law, in a way, not financing political projects. And I think if we, as Europeans, want to really gain and certain foreign policy alignment of those countries, but at the same time deliver also something those countries really need, particularly infrastructure investment. They need it massively. That is the basis for economic development. Then we need, I would say, an investment bank that is ready to accept risky projects and political projects and projects that will be planned a bit more quickly, not as neat and great as EIB projects typically are being conducted. With regard to the question of the financing literacy can help to fight corruption, I'm a bit unclear how that should really work out. I think actually rather that corruption is a dependent variable, that it depends on economic development. Poor countries don't have the state capacities to pay proper wages to judges, to policemen, to politicians, and clearly then you will have corruption. I mean, corruption is everywhere. There is not a single French president who will not have huge troubles with law enforcement after the end of his term, as we see these days, basically. So otherwise, if corruption would be determined by ethnicity or something, that would be, I think, quite a sad and racist argument. So I think this is really, with economic development comes less corruption. Obviously there are things you can do in terms of improving institutions, but again, I think investment in infrastructure and also attracting foreign direct investment in order to increase export capacities, so an export FDI-driven growth model, as it helped to bring out of poverty Central Eastern, Southeastern Europe, as it helped to bring out of poverty hundreds of million people in China. That is still the dominant development strategy. So I think these infrastructure plus attracting FDI in export industries should be the prime target, and there is again a win-win potential for Europe and Africa.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Gerald?
Thank you. Well, I think when it comes to aid, since we are an all-male panel, there was a book from a young woman at that time, Dambisa Moyo. It was called Dead Aid. Maybe you have heard about it. I really can recommend it, where all these 8 questions were asked and viewed from an African perspective. And this leads also to corruption, because one thing what you mentioned is this, I don't know if there is a term of it, I would call it petty corruption, the small corruptions within a country. But if there are big projects, and you mentioned it with the French presidents, there is always a two-way corruption, not just in Africa, but also involving Europeans. So it's not an African problem per se, it also involves us. And I think we should find a definition on what we are talking about when we are talking about corruption. To find new models for a balanced exchange, as it was mentioned, I think we have to rethink the way we are dealing, not just in action, but also in theoretical, from a theoretical point of view, because we are talking about Africa. We don't involve Africans when it comes to strategy. African countries will have their own strategies on how they see the world and what they want and with whom they want to deal. And I think we should listen a bit more to the to the countries in question in order to come to a more fair and balanced exchange?
Yeah, thank you very much. An additional?
Who shall coordinate humanitarian aid? Who shall coordinate the development programs? In 2018, I've written a paper for the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs about the strategy I've briefly outlined before. In 2022, I've discussed this with the European Parliament with a particular party about this. In 2024, the Italians have launched their Mattei plan for Africa. And they've defined in this plan clear priorities. Number 1 is education and training. Number 2 is agriculture, 3 health, 4 energy, sustainable energy, and 5 water management. And the Italians are using 5.5 billion euros for this. And they've invited other nations to follow on with these priorities. It's not so much who is coordinating this and that, it's more about a common understanding of priorities, and that all those who are working on Africa and who donate and have development programs for Africa work on common priorities.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and next round. Yeah, here we have a question in the third row.
I guess based on what you just said, what about the problem that international aid may well need to be better coordinated, but it's just completely decreasing at the moment? Like we talked about demography, Tunisia, one example, Ethiopia, the other. They managed to take the demographic rate from 7.7 in 1993, like children per woman, to 4 in 2015 through a whole load of international aid, providing contraception, liberalizing abortion, and so on, mainly relying on US aid. Obviously, every time the Republican government came in, that went off, and now it's US aid is dead in the water. But European aid is also reducing. Like all of the G7 were reducing their international aid budget. So, and this seems not just like human rights are not just a nice to have. This is the demographic challenge. This underpins security. So how can you make that argument that actually we do need to invest and actually increase our international aid budgets, not just redirect them, though I also agree with that, of course.
Thank you. In the last row.
Good evening. My name is Luis Valer. I'm from Spain. And as you know, Spain has a very important focus on Africa, especially in North Africa. We have our border issues with Morocco, land border with Morocco, and there's a lot of issues arising there, not only in Ceuta and Melilla, but also in the Canary Islands, as it was mentioned before. What happens there, not only it's a priority for Spain, of course, but also to Europe on the political, but also on the economic level. So I would like to ask you, what is your opinion on the role that Spain and other southern European countries like Italy, as it has been mentioned, it is nowadays, like how the priorities are focused, and what is your recommendation or your opinion on how their relationships with Morocco, Algeria, and other North African countries should be. And just a very quick personal remark or comment is how, it's also a question, how still important it is the colonial past for European countries when it comes to having a one-on-one communication and contact with African countries. Is that still a really heavy weight on our shoulders? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there, yes, in the first row, please. Just the micro.
Thank you very much. My name is Jakub Staubmann. I'm writing for 3 digital online magazines. My question is, I feel that Europe did not a good job in the past. Now we are waking up when Africa is also at the same time waking up to try to take things in their hands. And the question is, are we really serious about helping Africa to increase their possibilities for the future? Because we see now, like Burkina Faso is, for example, has a lot of problems with the whole world. because they want to be independent from all this hustle around. But Europe is now, after they also missing the help of United States, or they are not leaded anymore to really the policy which was applied before in Africa. I have the feeling this is the truth, that they are looking for their own interests, but Africans also are looking for their interests. How we are going to manage this? Still, weapons are delivered to Africa, and wherever we see there is some good relation, there is somebody there, dictators govern the country, and we are bribing him, you know. But this is very strange. Where we are going, really?
Okay, thank you. Is there another question? Yeah, over there, and then.
Thank you very much, first of all, for the interesting presentations. I was just wondering on the topic of climate change, because I see a big opportunity there as a shared interest between the EU and Africa, which is affected quite heavily by climate change already. But I also see a potential conflict line there, because obviously the argument could also go, well, Europe is already highly developed, used fossil fuels, now it would be our turn to do it. So I'm just wondering which one you see as more dominant right now, or more likely to materialize, the chance, opportunity aspect, or rather the conflict aspect of it all.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Maybe we start from the other side now.
Okay, I will start with the question of aid and the reduction of aid. We should not forget that aid is also a strategic instrument which is used in dealing with other countries, and maybe we should try more to move from aid to trade in order to also improve the overall relationship. And yes, the colonial past is a heavy weight, but we cannot discuss it away. Just look at the African map and look at the language map and which languages are used. Most of the languages which are used as a lingua franca are European languages. It's French, it's Italian, it's Portuguese, and it's a little bit of Spanish. So we cannot discuss this away. It's still there, and it will most probably stay there, because even when Rwanda changed its language policy in, I think it was in 1996, they said we will change now from French, not to Kinyarwanda or to Kiswahili, but they said we now change to English. So it's the languages are there, and it's colonial languages. So we will stay with this idea. When it comes to climate change and mutual interests and conflict, I think there are both legs somehow how there. On one hand, there are mutual interests where we can deal with each other. On other hand, there are also questions which will automatically lead to conflicts within the regions, between the regions, and even within sub-regions. And I would say in the future, conflicts will arise within the region, which will have an impact on also how Europe and Africa deal with each other. And I'm not only talking about droughts, I'm also talking about torrential rainfalls, about floodings within this area, which will lead to the movement of people.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, on this whole colonial issue, I mean, there is a way out, and I think the point is also that obviously a large chunk of that EU trade with Africa is performed by the former colonial powers, and I think where the potentials would really be are exactly those members of the Union that were not colonial powers. So, and where we see large growth and at the same time large also manufacturing capacities. So this would be Central, Eastern Europe. I think there have been also in some countries in communist times some ties with countries in the region that were perceived not necessarily as colonial, or there is a discussion whether that is really true, but nevertheless there is something to connect, I think, from that side, and I think that would be helpful in this process. Regarding climate change, I think actually I'm fairly optimistic in that sense, because just that the fact that given the Chinese overproduction of solar panels and wind farms, this will be the most cheapest way to produce energy. And I think that's just the issue of the price. And obviously it makes sense to have huge solar power stations in Northern Africa and connect that with strong electricity grids to the huge potential for wind farming in the North Sea and the Baltic Sea, and with the industrial consumers of that electricity in the center of Europe. So I think this is just such a clear thing. So the question is really, why aren't we doing things? And this brings me to the question, are we really serious about helping Africa? Well, obviously no. We are not even serious about helping ourselves. I mean, we are discussing whether the EU budget should be 1% of GDP or 1.3% of GDP, where anyway the largest chunk of it is earmarked by agriculture and can't do anything about the future, you know. So I mean, we are not even able to organize ourselves, let alone project any kind of power or even interests or even cooperation to the outer world. We are not even able to integrate the 6 Western Balkan countries, which are really, I mean, their combined GDP is half of Greece GDP. So it's a quantité négligeable in economic terms, but not in political terms. And I think we are really in huge troubles and have to do everything at the same time in all these areas.
Yeah, thank you for these open remarks.
Yep. I think the Burkina Faso and Algeria question were still open, but with regard to climate change, I would like to add green hydrogen. I was once at a workshop discussing about future energy transition and this and that with regard to Africa and Southern Europe. I think green hydrogen is another great opportunity. What do you need for it? You need energy and water. All the coastal African countries have these 2 resources. So I think this is another great opportunity with regard to energy, with regard to development of many African countries. Probably Mali or Niger are not the best suited countries for producing green hydrogen, but many others are. Relations. Relations are driven by interests, and at times Algeria and France also by history and by emotions. If we look to the Western Sahara, or whatever you want to call it, and the position of Spain, Spain definitely has a vital interest in stable relations with Morocco, for migration reasons, for security reasons, for many other reasons. Spain is in a difficult position, and they have, as you know, recognized the Moroccan position over the Western Sahara. If you look to Italy, for Italy, Algeria is much closer to Italy and much more important, starting with the first ENI boss, Enrico Mattei, than Morocco. They won't recognize the Western Sahara as part of Morocco. So it's all about interests. And therefore, there won't be a common European position about the question of the Western Sahara, because it's in the interest of some countries to recognize it, where it is in the interest of other countries not to recognize it. It's necessary to be realistic. Emotions and values, as I've explained on my pyramid, are not the top of the priorities. Burkina Faso. I've written in 2014, 2015, a midterm security outlook for a company which was about to invest in Burkina Faso. And at this time, Burkina Faso was not that bad off. But there was one huge risk, and this was the spillover from Mali. And I've warned, together with several others, that Burkina Faso needs to be hardened, especially the north of the country, to prevent such a spillover. Well, we know the outcome.
Okay, thank you very much. So now the very last chance to ask a question. Yes, please.
Oh, yeah, thank you so much. So I ask another question. Oh, I have this here. Thank you. I think something has been mentioned yet, and that is a demographic transition that goes more to Mario. We will have the peak of the gold spot, so to speak, for manufacturing in around 2040-50 in some of the African countries, where actually the labor force is in a position where we can actually we could bring some French companies to outsource cheap production, easy production into the countries that have demographic transition, and at the same time it would curb a bit of the migration pressure from these places. So that's something that I want to ask. What do you think about it? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there another one? Yeah, over here. Third row.
Thank you. I would like to ask a very provocative question, making a reference to what Mr. Pusztai said. How smart has it been to topple Muammar Gaddafi in Libya and turn Libya into another failed state? Because that has been pushed forward very much by the Europeans. And you rightly mentioned, I think in Egypt, al-Sisi is a dictator, yeah, but he provides stability. So what do you think about that?
Thank you. Third, yeah, Sharif.
Okay.
No, here in the first row. Yeah. You had already the chance to ask. Yeah, please.
I have the opportunity to accompany many delegates for development to Africa with some organization, international organization based here, like the UNIDO, Atomic Energy, and Drugs Control, CTBTO. And I know, for example, when I mentioned $500 million, what means for development for this organization. And on the other hand, I am coming from Sudan, and the ongoing war, the cost of this war is not millions or milliards, but trillions. And of course, the country producing these weapons, not only the colonial, but also newcomers. We can mention Turkey, Iran, and Russia. And of course, this money goes also to industrial countries. So here I ask if Europe can play a role, or the European Union. This is really what I am thinking, if you can have any answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now we come to the last round. Please be so nice and answer the questions, and also maybe just give us your very last advice, what we could do, what the society could do.
Well, I will take the question on Sudan. I think what we should, there is a cost of a war, but it's not just a monetary cost, it's also the human cost of war. I think nowadays in Sudan only 1/3 of the children can go to school, which will have an impact on the future of the country, of course, if children do not get education. And I also think that we do not do a proper conflict analysis at all, because if I read European newspapers, I see that the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese army are fighting, but it's a multi-layered, multi-dimensional conflict, not just between two generals, but also it has a regional level and intercommunal level and intracommunal level, where who is fighting and when and where. And I think we should really rethink how we look at the conflict and what we really can do. So the I think it's one of the reasons why nobody is really trying to intervene in the conflict in Sudan. It's also simply because of the complexity of the issues there, and I also don't foresee for the near future that anybody will really try to interact with the conflicting parties in a way that they can stop the atrocities that are committed at the moment. Well, for me, key takeaway of today is, first of all, the complexity of the issues we are talking about, that you can look at the continent from very different perspectives, that some perspectives can be brought together, some perspectives are not as close as one might see it, and I think that we need a lot of discussions on how to proceed with these issues on the different levels, the European Union, the member states, and we didn't even talk about some member states, how they intervene in on the continent in the different countries.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe.
Yeah, we'll say something on demographic transition, which affects with different in different directions Africa and Europe very much over the next decades. I mean, the situation in Europe is not only that, as we saw, the projections are that the overpopulation will decline, but there is a massive aging issue going on. So the working age population will shrink even stronger. At the same time, the major areas where so far migration into Europe happened, so basically Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, that's over. These countries have even bigger problems of aging and demographic decline. So on the other hand, Africa will have this huge increase in working age population, which the local labor markets will not be able to immediately absorb. So, I mean, it is pretty clear to see how migration flows of the next decades will look like. This goes obviously completely contrary to the current political discussions we have in Europe in particular, but not only. Where actually the general mood seems to rather go into an anti-immigration stance. But what are really the prospects, how to deal with that aging society? And Japan has tried to do everything with automation and robotization, but it failed. Japan has to allow immigrations of millions of younger people to join their country as we speak, basically, every year. So I think it will be fairly clear that a large migration flows from Africa to Europe can be expected in the next decades. And I think this time Europe should do it better than in the last migration movements, have a plan, maybe a strategy even, organize migration, organize maybe also forms of migration we are discussing a lot but implementing very little, where people move back and forth, where they can actually bring then also capital and technology back to Africa and improve the situation there as well, and try to really have a mutually beneficial circular migration flows. But I fear very much that this is not going to happen, that things will just somehow develop. But I think we would really have now the chance to actually probably on the EU level to actually develop strategies for these future flows of migration.
Yeah, thank you very much.
One sentence on demographics and migration and one sentence on human rights and dictators. If the demographic developments in Africa continue as we have outlined before, there is no way that the jobs required can be created, and there is no way that food security can be ensured. And there is no way that hundreds of millions of Africans that don't find jobs at home can be integrated in Europe. It is a key issue And President al-Sisi, for example, has understood already this question to get these demographic developments under control. I've discussed with some African friends, they said, human demographic developments is our advantage. Look into India and look into China, how prosperous those countries are. Yes, true, but there are very different preconditions. Again, this is of utmost importance, together with the environmental degradation, together with corruption and good governance, to get demographic developments under control. Dictatorship and human rights. Be careful with what you achieve. With the way you're dealing with countries. Be always careful about the impact of your deeds. If you undermine the stability of a country by undermining the credibility of a dictator, this may do some good or it may more often do some bad. Remember the J-curve model. If you have a country which is undemocratic, authoritarian ruled, and it's quite stable, before it slips over to an open democratic country, it needs to go down the J-curve. There is chaos. Think about Iraq, think about Libya. And it takes a very, very long time until it recovers. The more developed the country is, the more you can flatten this J-curve. I don't think Egypt would be a good role model for bringing a rather authoritarian ruled country with 120 million people with a flat J-curve to a more democratic situation. Be careful on how you are dealing with people like President al-Sisi and many others in Africa. This does not mean that we should ignore these atrocities, the daily conditions people are living, especially from the opposition. But we should discuss this with the rulers down there in the proper way and not undermining their stance in their own countries. This might be a very, very dangerous game.
Yeah, thank you. And I think time has come to give our speakers a big, big hand. Maybe at the end, just a very short remark from my side. I think the question is not only complex, it's not only big, it is so important for the future of Europe that we should occupy ourselves much, much more than we did in the past. I mean, it was outspoken already here. As a matter of fact, one sometimes has the impression, okay, in 2 months there will be another EU, African Union summit. Maybe or probably they will decide, I don't know, 20 or 30 pages of program, a program that nobody knows and that nobody will follow afterwards. What we need certainly is a much more pragmatic approach from the European side and a much more united approach. When Mario Holzner spoke about infrastructure, one cannot imagine, I mean, this disproportion of infrastructure that was made by Europe compared to other nations. Anytime in Africa, in any country, you would ask who has constructed this road, this harbor, this airport, this hospital, this government building or whatever. In 90% you will get the answer, this was China, maybe in 5% Turkey, in 3% India, but you never will hear this was constructed by Europe or by any European country, although we had such a strong link in the past. And this is what I cannot understand. This just means that we have the wrong way. The wrong way. We need to become much, much more pragmatic. We also have to accept the different conditions. Different conditions that offer also different and easier opportunities sometimes. We never will have probably, at least not in the next 20 years, a centralized energy system over the continent. It always will be a decentralized one. But this offers also that you can go into smaller or medium-sized projects and make it. It doesn't have always to be a continental or a whole state program. And we certainly have to be aware that demography will be the issue that is more or less defining the relationship in the future. And it will depend on us how we can, on the one hand, go into a more planned migration, into a channeled migration that is in our interest, and not just in a migration that is more or less organized by, I don't know, systems and organizations aside the states. This cannot be the future. And of course, we have also to try to find a normal situation, to normalize the relationship between former colonial powers and former colonies. I think, you know, it will be necessary also to look at it from both sides. I mean, if you look to what has been shaped by the British or the French only, to name the two biggest ones in Africa, I mean, there was also quite some investment that has happened. Investment in different sectors, not only in infrastructure, but in different sectors, culturally, education, and so on. It has to be accepted, okay. Of course, this is a period not understandable for the 21st century, but we have to take the good out of it and to recognize it. And also, I mean, the way that the African countries went in the last decade. This is amazing, with such a bunch of challenges, you know, to go away even if I just take the last example of yesterday or so, Malawi, yeah, democracy can work. The president, the acting president, is recognizing that he has lost the elections. He is overtaking the power to the one who won the elections and so on. There are many very positive signals and examples. And insofar, I think, we certainly have to learn that Africa cannot just be something, and general undefined idea, but something that is existing in our neighborhood and that will shape our future. And at the same time also, for Africa it will be important that Europeans will be able to participate in their development process. And insofar I think there is no alternative than to do something. And therefore we will continue also our way to discuss African-European relations. For the next time we also have to plan, this was a European sample. Maybe next time we should have an African sample to discuss it. Or maybe a mixed one, okay. But certainly we have to go into this process. And therefore, I want to thank once again our speakers for the excellent presentations. I have learned such a lot. I will study the maps and also the projections very, very intensively. Thank you so much for everything. And I want to thank you for your interest, because this is the necessary basis in order to bring changes. And in this sense, I just want, I want to end. And if the director doesn't have another, okay, he is content with his president so far. Thank you. And I want to thank you and wish you a very nice evening. And at the same time, I will invite you come to our next presentations. We have a lot, and especially if you just think it over in your calendar. On the 6th and 7th of November, we will have our European Forum, 6th in the evening, and the 7th is a Friday, the whole day, more or less, big event with prominent speakers from Europe, from Austria, and from many countries. Okay, in this sense, thank you very much, and I wish you a very nice evening.